someone's first miracle was control. Its first danger was that control had to hold every day. On flat lands where rain could not be trusted, villages became cities by channeling water, storing grain, and binding labor to the temple. A harvest was no longer only food. It was a ration, a debt, a mark pressed into clay. No city owned the water. It depended on authority stopped at walls and temples. The canals did not. They still needed hands in the mud, guards at the sluice, and grain held back at the gate. But what happened when the river's gift became a demand no city could refuse? The first fracture was almost silent. Water in the wrong place. Grain that did not return. And a tablet still waiting to be obeyed.
On the southern plain, the question was never whether water could bring life. It plainly could. The harder question was whether people could make water arrive where it was needed, leave when it had done its work, and return the following year without breaking the whole arrangement apart. Sumer began inside that problem. Its cities grew from a landscape corrected by hand, season after season. The land offered mud, reeds, fish, date palms, and fields that could be astonishingly fertile. It offered little stone, little timber, and almost no metal. Those had to be brought from somewhere else. The Tigris and Euphrates laid down the soil, but not a reliable plan. Channels wandered. Silt gathered. Floods came, with awkward timing. In the far south, rain was too uncertain to carry a harvest by itself. Long before Sumerian cities appear clearly in written records, communities of the Ubaid period had learned to live with that difficulty. Villages spread across the alluvial plain. Farmers grew cereals. Herders moved animals between settlement and open land. Fishers worked the marsh edges. Houses and shrines were built from mud brick, then repaired, rebuilt, and absorbed back into the ground. The habits were modest, but they mattered. Dig, drain, store, return. By the later 4th millennium before the Common Era, those habits had gathered around a place of unusual scale. Uruk expanded until it became one of the largest settlements then known anywhere. By around 3200 BCE, it was a city of monumental mud brick buildings, dense activity, and administrative pressure. Its sacred precincts, including the Ayanna complex, drew goods, workers, and offerings into a center that could no longer be managed like a village. Uruk's architecture made power visible. High platforms lifted important buildings above the plain. Painted clay cones, pressed into walls, created patterned surfaces from simple materials. Courtyards, storerooms, and workshops sat within a city fed by fields beyond its built edge. No block of stone announced its importance. The city's grandeur came from labor multiplied through mud brick, plaster, reed, timber, and repeated repair. The sacred areas of Uruk were not quiet chapels set apart from urban life. The Ayanna precinct, later associated with Nanna, grew through repeated phases of construction. Nearby, the Anu precinct carried its own sacred history. Simple, beveled rim bowls appear in huge numbers across Uruk period sites. Many have been linked with rationing, though their use was probably not identical everywhere. They are plain objects, and that plainness is useful. They bring the scale of the city down to the hand. The records grew from the same practical world. Early administrators used tokens, sealings, numerical signs, cylinder seals, and tablets to track goods. A surviving late Uruk clay tablet records beer with impressed numerical signs. Its surface is small, but the transaction behind it is large. Barley processed, drink issued, labor fed, responsibility fixed. This is not literature. It is accountancy at the edge of urban life. Cylinder seals made authority portable. One small stone cylinder could carry a scene of animals, labor, ritual, or a figure before a temple facade. Rolled over a lump of clay, it left a repeating image. Rolled over a door ceiling, it connected an official, a container, and a transaction. Before writing fully emerged, sealing practices already helped institutions control movement. Later tablets worked beside them. The earliest surviving proto-cuneiform tablets are overwhelmingly administrative. They show grain, animals, workers, measures, and officials more often than stories or prayers. True writing in the later sense emerged gradually, as signs gained wider uses and sound values. At first, the achievement was severe rather than literary. Clay made an order last, beyond the voice that gave it. The city had begun to leave a trace of its demands. A household could remember its own jars. A city needed records that survived absence, distance, and dispute. The scribe became a new kind of worker, trained to turn goods into signs. His tablet did not dig a canal or fill a granary. It gave institutions a way to inspect what others had done and to ask why something was missing. The temple stood close to this administrative world. It was the house of a god, and also a place where goods were collected, processed, and redistributed. The god of a city was understood as its owner and protector. Human officials served within that sacred household. Grain, wool, animals, beer, oil, and labor passed through rooms where religious obligation and economic management met without a modern line between them. No single temple machine controlled every person and field. Families held property. Local elites competed for influence. Palaces grew in importance beside temples. Some workers received institutional rations. Others lived through households, contracts, and obligations that changed by city and period. Large institutions gave urban life its reach. They fed specialists, commissioned buildings, and summoned labor beyond kinship. Sumer then became a country of cities. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Umma, Nippur, Eridu, Kish, and others formed a close, competitive world. Each city had its patron god, its cult places, its fields, its officials, and its claims to land. Nippur carried special religious authority through Enlil. Ur sat near waterways leading towards the Gulf. Lagash and Umma faced one another across valuable agricultural ground. The wall gave each city a body, but not independence from the plain. Canals crossed political boundaries. Villages supplied fields and labor. Merchants and boatmen brought materials from far beyond the south. A city might close a gate, but it could not close the river system. Sumerian politics grew from that tension. Local authority could command people, yet not every condition on which those people depended. The early dynastic city-state was a busy place, not a diagram of kings and priests. Houses crowded along lanes. Workshops produced pottery, textiles, leather goods, tools, and ornaments. Cattle, sheep, and goats moved between pens, fields, and temple herds. Sources show women and men in household, agricultural, textile, temple, legal, and administrative roles, though access and status differed sharply. Some names survive only because a ration list needed them. Rulers became more visible during this period. Their titles and powers varied, and the evidence is uneven. Some traditions mention assemblies of elders or fighting men, though their exact political weight remains debated. A ruler's public duties were easier to see: build, judge, lead troops, serve the gods, repair canals, protect boundaries, and place his name where future workers would see it. Temple and palace power overlapped. A temple could hold land, labor, animals, and workshops. A palace could direct war, tribute, building, and redistribution. Both needed surplus and obedience. Between them stood scribes, overseers, priests, dependents, and families trying to live within an order that was useful, demanding, and often unequal. Outside the city, a boundary ditch or canal bank could turn that order into a quarrel. Sumerian cities shared more than rivalry. Their scribes used related systems of signs. Their rulers invoked divine judgment. Their artists carved swords and monuments with recognizable patterns of authority. Inanna belonged especially to Uruk, Nanna to Ur, Enlil to Nippur, and Ningirsu to Lagash. Their stories and titles traveled. A merchant, envoy, or scribe entering another city found a different polity, not a different world. Then the rivalry sharpened into a case we can still partly see. Lagash and Umma quarreled over Gudea, a valuable tract of agricultural land. The dispute lasted through generations. It involved fields, irrigation, boundary markers, oaths, and the gods called to witness them. This was land in the most literal sense: soil measured, watered, crossed, claimed, and reclaimed. The Stele of the Vultures, made for Iannatum of Lagash, preserves a royal version of one victory over Umma. It is not neutral reportage. It is a legal, religious, and political monument. On one side, divine force frames the conflict. On another, the ruler leads organized troops. The message is unmistakable. Lagash's claim is military, sacred, and lawful. A border dispute has become public memory, carved in stone. Here, Sumer's maturity becomes visible. Ration tablets and temple hymns belong to the same world as boundary conflict, royal propaganda, and organized force. Soldiers marched in formation. Standards and commanders mattered. Early solid-wheeled battle wagons or equid-drawn carts appear in the visual world, but these were not the fast horse-drawn chariots of later centuries. Sumerian warfare was slower, heavier, and tied to the fields that caused many conflicts. This mature city-state world was not peaceful, but it was productive. Its workshops shaped imported stone and metal. Its boats carried goods through river and gulf routes. Its temples staged festivals and offerings. Its scribes copied lists and learned difficult signs. Its rulers built walls and sanctuaries. Out of this world came stories later attached to Gilgamesh of Uruk, whose possible historical outline is almost lost beneath literary memory. The South's poverty in raw materials made long-distance exchange essential. Cedar and other timber came from far beyond the plain. Copper, hard stone, silver, and lapis reached Sumer through routes that crossed mountains, deserts, rivers, and the Gulf. Later texts named Dilmun, Magan, and Maluha as distant lands of value. The exact geography behind every reference is debated, but the direction is clear. Sumerian cities needed a wider world to furnish their own splendor. Then a ruler from the Akkadian political world to the north, where Semitic languages were prominent, changed the scale of power. In the 24th century BCE, Sargon of Akkad built an empire that drew Sumerian cities into a wider structure. Much of what survives about him comes from royal inscriptions. later copies, and legendary traditions. Those sources cannot be read flatly. Even with caution, the break is clear. City-state politics have been overtaken by imperial rule. Akkad's own site has not been securely found. Its absence is striking. The empire is visible through texts, monuments, later memory, and the changes it forced on older cities. Governors, garrisons, tribute, and royal claims altered the political map. Akkadian became a language of power. Sumerian remained vital in learned, religious, and administrative life. The conquerors ruled the south and inherited its tools of rule. Sargonic power promised reach. It created new problems as well. A city-state could fight its neighbor and still understand the ground beneath the quarrel. An empire had to hold distant regions together through officials, roads, rivers, fear, reward, and reputation. Rebellion was a permanent possibility in such a system. The larger the claim, the more often it had to be restated. The Victory Stele of Naram-Sin presents Sargon's grandson above other men, climbing a mountain slope towards divine symbols. He wears the horned helmet of divinity. His soldiers advance below him in order. The monument is political art, not plain record. It shows what the empire wanted viewers to accept: the ruler as a force above the old city horizon. The Akkadian Empire eventually broke apart. The evidence does not support a single clean cause. Rebellions, succession problems, administrative strain, pressure from groups beyond the core, and environmental stress in parts of the wider region all belong to the crisis. Climate may have worsened conditions in some areas, but it did not mechanically explain every local collapse. In southern Mesopotamia, old cities and institutions remained capable of recovery. After Akkadian power faded, the south did not fall silent. Lagash again provides a revealing example through Gudea, a ruler remembered for temple building and piety. His statues show him seated, calm, and deliberate, hands folded in worship. His inscriptions describe the gathering of materials from distant lands for the temple of Ningirsu. The image is carefully shaped. A ruler who restores divine order through construction, not conquest. Gudea's world reminds us that Sumerian strength could return through local institutions. Temples were repaired. City identity endured. Trade links mattered again. The language of kingship became quieter than Sargon's imperial claims, but no less purposeful. A ruler could still prove himself by bringing cedar, stone, metal, and labor into a sacred building. In a land poor in raw materials, every imported beam carried political meaning. The final great political flowering came from Ur. Around 2112 BCE, Ur-Nammu founded the Third Dynasty of Ur. His state brought much of the south, and at times regions beyond it, under unusually tight control. The great ziggurat at Ur, in its earliest monumental form, belonged to his building program and was later restored in antiquity. It rose for Nanna, the moon god of the city. Ur-Nammu was also associated with one of the earliest known law collections. The text survives only partly, and the history behind it is not simple. Still, its royal message is clear. The king presents himself as a maker of justice under divine authority. He builds temples, orders society, and gives written form to penalties and protections. In Ur-the-Thur ideology, rule was meant to be visible in brick and legible in law. Under Ur-Nammu's successors, especially Shulgi, administration thickened. Provinces delivered goods. Labor was counted. Animals were moved through state centers. A system of rotating provincial obligations, often called Bala by scholars, helped supply the royal and religious economy. At Puzurshdagan, near Nippur, livestock passed through records in extraordinary numbers. Tablets note animals received, issued, transferred, or held for later use. The Ur-3 archive can feel dry until one imagines the motion behind it. A tablet listing sheep means herders, roads, pens, fodder, officials, and ceremonies. A ration account means grain measured into bowls. A labor list means people moved from households to work sites. The state did not simply possess information. It demanded constant reporting from human beings who might comply, delay, bargain, or hide failure. Shulgi, Ur-Nammu's son, gave this order a royal personality. His hymns present him as strong, learned, tireless, and favored by the gods. Royal praise is never a mirror held up to reality, but it reveals the ideal being claimed. The king should run, judge, command, build, worship, and understand the scribal arts. Under that image lay roads, messengers, warehouses, accountants, and provincial families tied firmly to the throne. This was administrative power at a remarkable level, and it was fragile. A centralized state had to trust provincial governors while watching them closely. It needed watercourses maintained, harvests delivered, messengers protected, and officials loyal. The more precisely it counted, the more exposed it became to interruption. A missing shipment was not a small inconvenience. It was a sign that command was losing contact with the ground. Environmental pressure made that ground harder to govern. Irrigation in a hot and poorly drained plain could contribute to salinization. The scale and timing are debated, and it did not end Sumer by itself. Yet it formed part of the background to agricultural strain. Barley, more tolerant of salt than wheat, became increasingly important. Canals also shifted, silted, and demanded labor. Maintenance was not a policy choice. It was survival. By the reign of Ibbi-Sin, the last king of Ur, stress had entered the written record with unusual clarity. Royal correspondence, later copied letters, destruction laments, and the archive connected with Isin all point towards a kingdom narrowing under pressure. Grain shortages and famine conditions appear in the crisis evidence. Routes became unsafe. Provinces drifted. Officials began to act as if the center might not recover. Ishbi-Erra is the key figure in this unraveling. He had served within the world of Ur, but during Ibbi-Sin's crisis, he established himself at Isin. The letters associated with the period present a dangerous mixture of shortage, suspicion, and political maneuver. Grain could be gathered but not safely delivered. Orders could be written but not enforced. A royal servant could become the founder of a rival kingship. The Amorites, known in Mesopotamian texts as Martu, added pressure from the west and northwest. They should not be treated as a single invading mass. Amorite groups were varied, and many became part of Mesopotamian society as soldiers, pastoralists, workers, and rulers. In the Ur-Threa crisis, however, Amorite movement and disruption mattered. Elam and powers from the east mattered as well. Ur was being pressed from more than one direction. The fall did not come in one clean scene. Ibbi-Sin held Ur for years while the state around him contracted. Some administrative centers stopped producing records for the king. Campaigns on the margins became less effective. Isin separated. Grain supply became a political weapon. The language of universal rule survived in royal formulae, but the territory able to answer that language had grown smaller. Around 2004 BCE, Ur fell to Elamite forces and their allies. Sin was taken away, and the Third Dynasty of Ur ended. Later laments describe the city as if divine protection had withdrawn from its streets, temples, and storehouses. They are theological poems, not eyewitness reports. Yet they preserve the meaning of collapse for those who inherited its memory. A city had lost more than a king. Sumer did not vanish when Ur fell. People remained. Fields were still worked. Boats still moved. Contracts were still written. Isin and Larsa became major powers in the new political landscape. Amorite dynasties adopted Mesopotamian forms of kingship. Akkadian dialects became increasingly dominant in ordinary written and spoken life. During the centuries after Ur III, Sumerian as a living language receded, but its prestige did not die. In scribal schools, Sumerian remained a language to be mastered. Students copied sign lists, lexical lists, model contracts, proverbs, hymns, and royal praise poems. A boy learning to write in an old Babylonian school might copy words from a language no longer spoken in his street. The exercise was not antiquarian play. It trained the hand, disciplined the mind, and connected the student to old authority. Later, Babylonian and Assyrian scholars preserved Sumerian compositions in temples, libraries, and schools. They copied myths of Enki and Inanna, laments over ruined cities, hymns to gods, and stories linked to ancient kings. They kept bilingual traditions, pairing Sumerian with Akkadian. They studied old signs because knowledge itself had ancestry. In Mesopotamia, scholarship often meant learning to speak with the dead through clay. The old stories changed as they traveled. Gilgamesh, once linked to Uruk, entered Akkadian literature and was reshaped into a meditation on kingship, friendship, fame, and death. City laments turned political catastrophe into liturgy. Lexical lists arranged the world into teachable order. A student copying them was not only learning vocabulary, he was inheriting a method: classify, compare, preserve, and make the past usable. The legacy also passed through institutions. Written law collections after Ur-Nammu belonged to a broader Mesopotamian tradition of royal justice. Temple rebuilding became a way for later kings to claim continuity with ancient sanctuaries. The ziggurat at Ur itself was restored centuries after Ur-Nammu. Old cities could be politically diminished and still remain powerful as sacred addresses in the imagination of later rulers. Sumer's place in world history should be stated with care. It was among the earliest known urban civilizations. Uruk was among the earliest cities of immense scale. Proto-cuneiform was among the earliest writing traditions. Sumerian literature is among the earliest preserved bodies of written literature. These achievements need no exaggeration. Their importance lies in the evidence they leave for one great version of the human crossing from village life into the city. That crossing changed daily existence. A farmer might depend on a canal maintained by people he never met. A textile worker might receive barley from an institution rather than a household field. A scribe could gain status through signs, but his skill tied him to authority. A ruler could build for the gods and still be defeated by shortage, rebellion, or the refusal of distant officials to obey. The remains are stubbornly physical. Mud brick platforms sink into the plain. Cylinder seals preserve tiny scenes of ritual, work, animals, and rank. Tablets record malt, barley, sheep, fields, messengers, and days of labor. A brick stamped with a royal name may outlast the wall it once formed. The materials are ordinary. The world they reveal is not. Picture a school tablet in a later Babylonian city. One side covered with a teacher's neat model signs, the other with a pupil's uneven copy. The language is old. The hand is young. Sumer has become lesson, discipline, and inheritance. The Sumerian story began with communities learning how to live where nature gave nothing, simply. It reached its height when cities turned water, grain, worship, writing, trade, and command into a working order of fields, storehouses, shrines, and offices. It ended as an independent political world when that order could no longer hold its parts together. The failure was bound to the achievement. Both rested on the same demands. What lasted was not a throne. It was a labeled tablet, a copied exercise, a rebuilt sanctuary, a royal name pressed into brick. On the flatlands of southern Mesopotamia, one of the great urban lines in human history had been crossed. One version of the city had begun, and with it came the long burden of keeping civilization in order.